Some highly educated American women choose to have many children, five, six, seven, or even more. How do these women explain and understand their choices to have such large families? What do their stories tell us about the broader forces that influence fertility decisions? And what are the implications of large families for individuals and communities? Welcome to Economics Applied, a Hoover Institution podcast. Our guest today is Catherine Pekalik. She is Director of Political Economy and Associate Professor of Political Economic Thought at Catholic University. She holds a BA in Economics and Mathematics from the University of Pennsylvania and a master's degree and a PhD in Economics from Harvard. Welcome, Catherine.
Thanks, Steve.
So you recently authored a book titled Hannah's Children. Mm-hmm. The title alludes to the biblical Hannah, who prayed to God for a child and was eventually blessed with 6 of them. Mm-hmm. So your book grabbed my attention for several reasons. First, I'm intrigued by its focus on women who make very different life choices than most of their peers. In one sense, your book is about outliers, but not the sort that garners approval in popular culture, or for that matter, in most professional and university circles. Second, and here I'm speaking as a professional economist, you earned a PhD in economics at a top university, but your research approach is highly atypical for an economist. In this respect, your book and its approach are also outliers, at least among professional economists. Third, the views espoused by your subjects and by you as the author offer a striking and thought-provoking contrast to prevailing views and social norms about fertility and family size. So all those things kind of really made your book stand out for me, and I'm delighted to have the opportunity to chat with you about some key themes in your book.
Great. Likewise.
So maybe to start, you can just tell us a bit about your own life and family choices, at least as they relate to the subject of your book, because they do. So go ahead.
Sure. Yeah, I tackled that right away in the first chapter. Yeah, in a sense, I think sometimes research is about noticing things, right, and what we notice. And I chose to have a lot of children. So, when I started out graduate school, I met my husband in the end of the first year of graduate school, and we had our first baby. I mean, maybe at the end of my second year of graduate school, thereabouts, around the time I was taking comprehensive exams. And I just really enjoyed him so much. Found him really interesting and fascinating. I felt a little bit like maybe motherhood had been undersold. I think I used that language in the book. My graduate work, I had 6 children, which, that was an unusual number of children to
that's
have.
Putting it mildly.
Yeah, it was an unusual number. I'm not, it may have been a record, although I wasn't interested in records, so nobody looked it up. But Harvard has a fun tradition where when you walk for your diploma, your kids can come with you. So that was kind of a fun moment. So the econ faculty were there. So these little kids are trailing along.
Come with you?
Yeah, they did all come along. They all walked across the stage with me, which is pretty fun. But back to your question, I had done about a third of my dissertation work on kind of questions, basically extending Becker's model of fertility, trying to see if it could accommodate some like a model of marriage and other ways of thinking about the contraceptive revolution. And then as we headed past the Great Recession and economists started to worry about, well, we're not really seeing the rebound we were hoping to see, I started to wonder, so it's a question of noticing. I'm thinking to myself, well, there's a lot of outliers here. And is it possible that the outliers will tell us something about the trend? And that was really the initial impulse. So, yeah. So I would say, I think anybody could have done this research besides me. But because I had children, it seemed something I noticed.
You're being too modest. I mean, as I mentioned before, your research approach is not typical of an economist.
That's
but
true.
Economic thinking intrudes on the discussion
Yes.
throughout the book. So you're quite you're quite knowledgeable about the literature, the economics literature on fertility.
Yeah.
You mentioned Gary Becker's seminal
Yeah.
work on the subject, which is really central to the way most economists
Right.
approach. So you have that knowledge.
Yeah.
You're also well aware of, prevailing empirical approaches in economics, and that's not what you
Yes.
do.
No.
So why
No,
don't you
it's
tell
not.
us about how you approach the
I
subject?
will tell you. Yeah. Yeah, I felt I needed to make a little bit of an apology for that in the first chapter. And I mean that in the classical sense, in a kind of an apologia, a defense, not really asking for forgiveness.
Right.
Yeah, I think I'll maybe mention a couple of different things. One is that I had admired lots of research and applied micro topics, education, family, labor. I mean, certainly, the labor research at Harvard at the time was really strong, and I admired lots of it. But I also was starting to see a kind of maybe a lack of dynamism in some of those areas of research, and almost as a sense is that maybe this has played itself out. What else is there to look at? And so you're sort of scratching your head and you're thinking, well, what else is there? So then you kind of have this question of theory, and so. So for me, it was a kind of confluence of a bunch of things. One is, there's a lot of things we can test. We need to continue testing things, but how are we refining our theories? And so, I had years ago, years before, I mean, like 2003 or five, I think, I had come across this study of non-marital births in the inner cities written by Maria Kafalis and Catherine Eden. And, it was, and one of them had been at the Kennedy School at the time. And so I had read this book and I thought, wow, like look at the depth you can get out of interviewing people. And, they had basically moved into inner city Philadelphia and spent a lot of time interviewing, in their words, women who put motherhood before marriage. And so I just put a pin in it. I thought, this is fantastically interesting stuff. And I watched the policy conversation around the question really shift. And it stayed with me. I thought, well, it's not what we're trained to do. And I don't really know how you do that kind of work. But, it stayed with me. When I think about like most of applied micro, when I was coming up in the field and being trained, we really just mostly thought about refining our causal inference stories. And that's been great. It's a huge, kind of set of progress. But at the end of the day, you have another approach. Like when you have things you can't get a good causal story on, in the quantitative, like you can tell a better story about it, right? So if you've got a correlation that's robust, you say, like, this correlation keeps surfacing. If you can't get a good causal read on it, you can tell a better story. And so I kept thinking, okay, well, look, we know there are some very strong, robust correlations about fertility and birth rates. They're out there. We all know them, right? We know that education is inversely correlated with birth rates. We know that religious practice is positively correlated with birth rates. But what we don't really have is a great story about what's going on. So, all of these pieces kind of came together, and I thought, well, maybe if I just went out and talked to people, and I sort of basically argued, look, I mean, this may be the way the field does economics today. This isn't exactly like doing economic research, but I said, I think it's an economic exercise to go and sort of investigate the trade-offs that people are making. Like, what do they think is going on? And then the way I've settled on trying to explain it is like, we need to disentangle whether falling birth rates are really a sort of a supply problem or a demand problem. And I found that the stories were very compelling for helping to think through that.
Okay, so you were motivated, at least in part, to explain the really spectacular, striking trends in fertility around much of the world. Around most of the world we see in recent decades. And I agree with your assessment. We as economists don't have a great explanation, great understanding of that.
Yeah.
But I want to give my assessment of what makes your approach distinctive, because you can tell me if you agree. So first, you're just going to ask people, not in a survey, but at length. You're going to talk to them for 2 or 3 hours.
That's right.
About something that is deeply personal and try to recover their own thinking faithfully in kind of loosely structured conversations.
Yeah.
So that's
right.
There's some
That's
of that in other areas of social science, but that's pretty unusual.
that's right.
To say it's not unheard of in economics, but it's pretty
Right.
unusual.
Right.
Second thing you're doing, which is, not, which is also outside of 98% of
Mhm.
economics, is you're trying to understand where people's preferences come from,
Yeah.
other than taking them as given in the analysis.
Right.
And moreover, you're actually trying to understand what shifts their preferences
Yeah.
in a personal way. So
Yeah.
there's not very much research like that in
Mm-mm.
economics. Okay, so
No.
that's the second thing.
Yeah.
The third thing you're doing, and this, so I kind of fully applaud the first two. The third,
Mm.
I just want to point out, it has
Yeah.
strengths and weaknesses, and that is
Yep.
you're selecting on the outcome variable of interest,
Hmm.
forming your sample, and
Yep.
that can lead you,
Yeah.
that we need to approach with caution. I
Yep.
understand why you did it,
Hmm.
but it can lead to a somewhat distorted perception of what's really going out there
Yeah.
in the population as a whole.
Yep.
So, in all three of those respects, you've kind of violated what you were taught in your applied micro courses and your
Yeah.
theoretical courses at
Yeah.
Harvard.
That's
Uh,
true.
so, I
Yeah,
just
that's
want
true.
to take note of that, and
Yeah.
hats off really for
Yeah.
it's
No,
really an audacious approach.
that's right.
So
Uh, well, I figured it was a risk. It seemed like a risk worth taking, and I thought, well, if 5 people read it, I'll move on and write some more papers afterwards. But no, I think the fruits have been apparent. Yeah, the limitations notwithstanding, they're there, they're clear. But it's opened up so many great things we can do next, and we can research next,
right,
and yeah, so
okay. So just tell us a little bit more about
yeah,
how you a little on the
yeah,
technical stuff for a minute.
yeah.
But how did you put together your sample?
Hmm.
And how did you go about then doing the research itself? A little bit on
Sure,
that, and then we can
sure.
get into what you learned.
Hmm. Yeah, well, I kind of got all the books and tried to self-teach, like, how do sociologists mostly do this. Benefited from reading a lot of lecture notes out of the University of Chicago. It's just great work in this area. Anyway, what you do is you just what you think. You sort of go like, well, where are families located? We picked cities. We picked about 10 regions in the country. And we went into those cities and we said, okay, where are places where families might hang out? We knew like our target population. We were searching for women who are college educated, particularly just to look. We knew couldn't interview everybody. We had limited resources, and that's this education and fertility is where the real squeeze is. We figured let's go talk to those people, and we just looked at where families hanging out. So you find a contact at a university, say, or a large church in a city. You say, hey, this is the kind of person I'm looking for. Could you share this? You've got a flyer. You invite interested people who see the flyer to take a screening survey. This particular study, we had about 600 people apply across 10 areas, or 10 regions. And so in each city, again, this would be posted in churches and like YMCAs and other places people might see it. Then we get these screening surveys, and the surveys are designed to help us kind of pick a balanced sample. And so for all the econ quants listening, yeah, this is like totally not a representative sample in any normal sense, right?
Right.
Sometimes people say convenient sample. It's not. It's better than a convenient
Yeah,
sample.
it's better than it. Yeah, you've
Yeah,
sampled across cities, but just
yeah,
in these
and
flyers where you're trying to recruit
mhm,
potential interviewees,
yeah.
did they communicate that you are someone who has a large family and that
Mm-mm.
the average American would say 6 or 8 children?
Yes, that's right.
Okay, so it's
That's
important to
right.
understand that.
Interestingly, we don't have a good large representative sample of families with kind of above average numbers of children. No one's oversampled that, we'll say. So
Okay,
that's what you'd want. If you wanted to go out and study this, you'd want an oversample.
right,
No one's done it. I think this might be done soon. This is like because it's become such an interesting issue for people.
right.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Okay,
So
so
yeah, so
you
it's a pretty privileged group of people. Nevertheless, we looked for people, particularly who were low income. We had some interviewees who'd been on food stamps at different points in
Mhm.
time, and we had some that were fantastically wealthy and a bunch of super middle class people.
Okay,
Yeah, and so you go in and like okay, you just say nice things about their kids and um, so usually at that point, I mean, sometimes they would ask, But usually at that point, you kind of say, well, you know, I know what it's like, or whatever that is.
Right.
You know, you're just trying to
Right.
establish rapport, and that's a good thing.
Yep.
Yep.
Okay. All right. So what did you learn from your extended conversations with these women about why
Hmm.
they and their husbands, the
Yeah.
husbands are in the background here, but they're
Yeah.
not completely passive players, why
That's
they
right.
chose to have large families? What did you learn?
Hmm. Yeah. So, before diving into the ways people could get there, I mean, I learned that really these are people who ready to, sort of rearrange like a lot of other life goals in order to have these children. And that struck me as super different from at least the narratives I was already familiar with. So, broadly speaking, painting with a broad brushstroke, people who had typically religiously motivated or experiential reasons to say like this is really important. This is top of my list important. I would I would count my life as having been a big disappointment if I didn't have these children. So really a story, really what we would say like high demand for children. And that was interesting. Now, how did they get there? Well, kind of there were two ways. Basically there were the always wanted kids people who
Hmm.
had some kind of life experience that contributed to that. I try to profile for you a couple of the ways that happens. One typical way, which I think people would guess, is that some people grew up in big families. And so they thought, well, this was really great. I loved having, to your earlier point, I expect if I went out and did a completely similar study with people with few children or no children, some of them would look similar. They would say, well, I grew up in a large family. I didn't love it. So that would be
Right.
something worth doing later. But so that was one way it happened, and then another way it could happen is some people said, "Well, I grew up with no siblings, and it was very lonely." And there was a family on the block, and there was like kids always in the house, and I just thought that's what I want. And then the other way, which was really interesting, were these kind of profound like religious conversions, and this happens to people. Because a lot of religious traditions are not agnostic about having children. So, it had like Jewish converts and sort of evangelical Christian converts and Catholic converts who, at some stage in their adult life, had encountered a religious tradition in a particular community. Like, literally, I went to Israel to find myself. I met a charismatic rabbi who said, this is the meaning of life. And I thought, yeah, I buy that. I'm going to do this. And so those religious conversions are very interesting.
When you say conversion here,
Hmm.
do you
Yeah.
always mean literally a conversion, or you just mean somebody who might have been casually religious and now it's affected their life in a different way?
Yeah.
Is that what I'm just trying to understand what you mean by conversion?
Yeah. So I guess both types.
Okay.
But I mean like a religious experience
Okay.
that may have been a change of religious belief or a refinement. So certainly the Jewish case that I tell at the beginning, she was ethnically Jewish, grew up Jewish, but grew up sort of really super secular and didn't have a Jewish lifestyle. And I mean, I'm using her language. She said, "And now I've chosen an intentionally Jewish lifestyle." So, I don't know a
Okay.
lot about the different ways you can be Jewish, but
Okay.
yeah,
All right. And you also talk about people, women, and
mhm,
sometimes their husbands are
yeah,
intimately involved in the same kind of transition process who
yeah.
weren't sure if they wanted many kids, but they had one or two, and it was such a it profoundly affected their desire to have more.
Yes, exactly. So I kind of distinguish between how it started and how it's going, and in that sense, this kind of colloquialism. But yeah, this was a big reason for some people to keep going. They had that first kid. I mean, this was, I had a lot of reasons to keep going, but this was a huge piece of my experience. Was this is so much more enjoyable than I expected. One lady said, "Well, we just fell in love with babies." That's an interesting thing. And then you have to ask all kinds of other questions like you're living in an environment where you're not really socially normed that much. I mean, the woman who said we fell in love with babies, I mean, they have their own personal church in the Rocky Mountains. And, when I say their own personal church, I mean, there's a church of about 15 members. And so in other words, like there's no social norming that says, well, you fell in love with babies, but sure, like we all love babies, but it's like not reasonable to go past two. So of course there's other factors here, but in terms of that preference formation, It was very clear that a positive experience with having the first couple of babies was a big motivator for some people. And stepping back and looking at the broader literature on demographics, one of the things people today think is affecting the birth rates is that people are transitioning to parenthood so late in their reproductive cycle that if they discover late in their 30s, gosh, I really love babies, it may be too late to have a second or a third. So I think it's worth highlighting the importance of
Yeah, I agree.
that possibility.
This is
Yeah,
a key issue.
yeah,
I mean, uh, I'm sympathetic to the view because I've seen it in my own
yeah,
social circles and
yeah.
family that for some women the experience and the some
And the
families the
dads too.
experience of
Yeah.
having one or two children
Mm-hmm.
profoundly alters their view about the
Yeah.
desirability of additional children.
Right.
And as you say, if you have your
Mm.
first child at age 37
Yeah.
and you suddenly decide you want four,
Yeah. Yeah.
that's not very likely to come about. So
Right.
there are potentially important implications
Yeah.
of the timing of fertility over the
Right.
life cycle for how many, whether people actually end
Yeah.
up having the number of children that they desire. And I think
Mm-hmm.
you cite this research,
Yeah.
which finds that, first, it's well established that
Yeah.
there's on average a gap.
Right.
You ask 40-year-old women how many children did you want and how many do they eventually have. On average, they have less than
Yeah.
they wanted. And that's especially true for women who started later.
Yeah.
So there really is, again, this is outside the scope of what economists usually
Yeah.
think about, but there's
Right.
a certain departure from rational expectations here,
Yeah. That's
which
right.
which is interesting to note.
Yeah. Yeah. That's right. I mean, I I present the data on the fertility gap. I think it's important. It's a big piece of this whole conversation about birth rates. I try not to take a dogmatic position about it in the book because I don't have a dogmatic position about it. I mean, if you're an economist and you propose, I mean, I think a classically trained economist, if you say, well, I've discovered there's a gap between what people, kind of hope to have and what they actually have, I would say, tell me something new. If you ask people how much income they would like to have, there's an income gap, how many cars they would like. I mean, in other words, like this is the whole thing we're discussing in economics is that we can't have everything we have. There are trade-offs and budget constraints, and the world offers constraints. So I'm on the one hand, it's like worth discussing. On the other hand, there's a task to be done. I mean, one of the first papers to point out the fertility gap, to my knowledge, was Golden and Katz's Power of the Pill, and I think it's just a footnote in there. And Claudia says what I think a lot of us would like. My first pass would be this is a trade-off. I mean, so, if you flip the question around, if women are choosing between career and children, is there a career gap?
Yeah,
Probably,
but
probably there is one.
I don't think that's all of it. I mean,
No, I agree with you.
because if you ask people about intentions
Yep,
rather than wants,
yep.
you need a longitudinal study of intentions and
Yes,
realizations.
exactly,
But I,
exactly.
but I
I
think what
agree
you
with
would
you.
find is that there's a gap between intentions expressed, say, at age 20 and
Yes,
realizations at age 40. And
yes,
that's not so easily explained by just the trade-off, and we all want
yeah,
more of everything that's good. But of course, we have to make choices.
yeah. No, that's right. That's right. I pointed out because typically it's treated like as prima facie evidence that there's some kind of way that if we sent bigger stipends to people, they would end up having more kids, and I think that doesn't follow.
Right, right.
So yeah.
So, you mentioned the role of religion and religious
Hmm.
beliefs already. It comes
Yeah.
through quite clearly
Yeah.
in your conversations with these women, but there's also, uh, at least this is my reading. You can tell me if you
Hmm.
disagree. There's
Sure.
various pieces of evidence in there that it's almost broader than religion.
Yeah.
There's
Yes.
one woman who has this very nice phrase. She she wants to be part of the chain of infinity,
Yeah.
which is really she sees the process of motherhood, childbearing, as
Yeah.
connecting her to the whole stream of humanity, looking
Yeah.
backwards in the past and forward
Right.
into the future. It's almost a mystic
Yeah.
rather than religious
That's
view.
yeah.
Um,
That's
and
right.
then there's other women who explicitly talk about, and they may be religious themselves, but they say things
Hmm.
like, this is almost underneath religion
Yes.
or pre-religious. So
Yes.
I at least read
Hmm.
um, your interviews as saying, in the United States context at least, this kind of desire and to have children and feel like you're part of something bigger than yourself
Hmm.
most often manifests itself in religious ways, or it's tied up to religious beliefs, but it is really something broader than that.
Yeah.
You agree with that assessment of your?
I do. I deeply agree with that assessment,
Okay.
which is one of the reasons I struggled to find words for this. This is why I end up with this like funny title, Hannah, the biblical Hannah, because it's more like there's an archetype or kind of orientation to something that we might say is like anthropological or a view of what it means to be human or something like that. If it was doctrinal, then we would find it would differ across these religions. But what I found is that I thought the expressions that these, I mean, how do you explain? You got women in, Jewish women in the middle of the country and evangelical women at on the coast, and they don't even read the same stuff. So yeah, I definitely struggled. It's definitely, this thing is not unique to any particular religion, as far as I can see. And but as you say, at least as far as we can see in the United States, it's typically sort of supported or nourished in religious
Mhm.
traditions that affirm the value of having children. But what they're after is something that's maybe human or,
Yeah,
yeah, anthropological. Yeah.
right. And
Hmm.
and here, as in many other aspects of human
Yeah.
beings, the
Yes.
intensity of this manifests itself very differently across
Yes.
people. And
Right.
for some people, this really isn't maybe a consideration at all, but it did come through clearly in
Yeah.
your sample of interviewees.
Yeah.
And just, I don't think we said it yet. Everyone in your
Hmm.
sample has at least 5 children. Is that
That's
right?
right.
And there's a
Yeah.
good number who have 8 or more.
Yeah. The
Yeah,
average was 7.
7. Okay.
And actually, it's funny. Inside the sample, you see the trade-off with career. Actually, it's interesting because of course, I set the lower bound at 5. That's arbitrary. Could have been 4. Could have been 3. But I set the lower bound at 5. And inside my sample, the ones with 8 or 10, they were full-time moms, and the ones with 5 or 6 were oftentimes working like I
Right.
am. Right. So,
Right. So, okay. So what do you think these stories and explanations tell us about the broader cultural and social forces
yeah,
that influence fertility decisions? We've touched on that already, but
yeah.
what are the main lessons you would want to convey in that respect?
Yeah. So I've spent a lot of time, I, I maybe have spent a few pages on it in the book and probably not enough time. And as we know, trying to teach anything economic, it's like not easy. We start trying to, you think when they hand you Econ 101, you think, oh, this is going to be a cinch. And then you start teaching it. You're like, what? Like, how do I derive a demand curve again? That's not actually so easy. So it's taken me now a couple of, well, I would say months. I've been really trying to figure out how to refine this demand story. So the kind of economic lesson I took away is to really think harder about demand. And so, okay, meaning, okay, these are people who really want their kids. These weren't people who like. There was plenty of room. They could have said, "Well, I had easy pregnancies. Just pop them out. No big deal." These are people who the driving story was demand. And in fact, they all articulated nicely, like all of the personal costs. And so, we could, it's like, I'm trying to carve this up in a way that makes sense. So I thought, well, this is interesting. We've just been treated to these multiple stories of what it looks like to really want kids. And that made me start to ask the question of like, well, have people always wanted kids? And what is the demand story going back? And I thought, well, remember that old thing we used to like read in 7th grade that like, well, in the old days, people had kids because they were really useful on the farm. And I thought, okay, that's interesting. We can work with that. So I kind of worked through. And so I think the way I've liked to present this now to audiences when I talk about it is that the demand for children has basically collapsed, and you can kind of trace that in lots of different ways. And when I say that, I do mean the economic demand for children. Children were domestic help and labor. It doesn't mean that's the only reason people had them. We'll set that aside for a minute, but they just were. They functioned that way. In a poor society, look, all hands on deck, right? Like, hey, you're ready to
Mhm.
make cheese, you're making cheese, you know. So domestic help and labor, and that's really machines and it's economic growth, and that's a good story. Don't need as many surviving children. And then you had pensions and old age support. Children really did serve an economic function for the household. And so then thinking about the locus of demand, like it's the household that has to choose this, you see that collapse. And then finally, birth controls are really a really strong contributor to a collapse in demand. What I mean there is just now, I presented in the book this quote from some demographers that I think are it's really stunning. When they say, look, like in the old days, basically you got married and you start having kids because that's what happened. And they say, well, when you get really effective birth control, what you have next is you separate the demand for marriage, which is pretty robust over time, and the demand for children. Like, in other words, they are two separate rational decisions to make.
Mhm.
And so what they said was the key decision from a demographic perspective used to be when to stop having children. You got married, you had some kids, and at some point you said, all right, we got to do something about this. Maybe we don't want a fourth kid or a third kid. And there were always things people did, and we can think about all those things. And they said, but the new decision isn't when to stop, it's when to start.
Yeah. And that ties back to
And
some of
that,
our earlier
yeah,
discussions
exactly.
about children as an experience good and
Exactly.
the relation
Precisely.
and
So as soon
tension.
as you make that decision separate, now it's a qualitative decision. It's a decision that's like when's the right amount, when's the right time, when's the all of those things. So this is a whole piece of this demand story. So I think you could have economic growth and you could have pensions and savings, but if you didn't have the really effective birth control, you'd still have like an earlier transition to parenthood. So this
Well,
is this demand story.
okay. Of the three
Yeah,
elements to the demand
yeah,
story that you described,
yeah.
the one that strikes me as the least
Hmm.
important, least persuasive in a global context is the one
Hmm.
about pension,
Hmm.
because
Yeah,
the fertility collapses happen in almost every country, not just the ones that have well-developed social
yeah,
insurance programs.
yeah.
Whereas the
That's
other
right.
two phenomena you
Yeah,
described
yeah.
really, they really are global phenomena and
They
they
are
tie.
global. Yeah,
So I guess I think of
yeah,
the children as the way I save for my old age seems like,
yeah.
yeah, I understand the economics of that. It makes
Sure.
perfect economic sense, but it just doesn't seem to be the operative force in much of the world.
It certainly doesn't explain, or it's not like it. Yeah, it doesn't explain a significant portion of the variation of the last 50 years of
Yeah.
collapse of birth. Yeah, for sure. I agree with that.
Okay. So collapse in demand
Hmm.
and well, let's
There's
maybe
more
we
to
should
that. Yeah, yeah.
let's there's more to that, but
Hmm.
maybe you want to say something about, well, is there how should we respond to that as a
Yeah,
society, and if so,
yeah,
how?
yeah. Well, I don't think it's possible to respond to the two pieces that you find compelling, right? Like the economic growth. I mean, we're just very wealthy. That's that's good news. We don't want to, but listen, I mean, it's worth saying that you do hear. Oh, and by the way, let me go back. Collapse in demand, and then there's this opportunity cost story. So there's a cost that increases, but it's not the cost of having kids. It's the
Yeah,
opportunity. Okay, so we
opportunity.
we all know that story. Um,
And just for our non-economists listening,
mm,
you're referring to women's opportunities in the market sector to earn
yeah,
wages, to pursue rewarding
yeah,
professional careers and the like.
right, right, right. Yeah, so I don't think I was going to say part of the job right now of sort of explaining this work is responding to some of the stuff you hear out there. I have heard people say, and credible like adults say, maybe it would be good for us if we became more poor or we embraced a program of degrowthing. Because if we got more poor, we would want more kids again. And you're like, okay, like, right. So to me, that's not sort of something we could respond to in that way. I don't think we should want to do that. Um, the the other, I mean, we're not going to put the genie back in the box on birth control. I don't think that's something we're going to go back on and shouldn't. It's a good thing we know how to decide when to have children and when not to have children. So then a question arises like, can you incentivize demand through some, policy program? Because then that's all that you've got left, right? You can't reverse these. I guess we could call them technological changes. Certainly, the birth control is a shock. Economic growth is a series of things. And but I think for me, this is a very compelling way to understand the reason why these financial incentives have not worked.
Right.
So as a society, the standard approach is let's do some kinds of, subsidizing of childbearing in order to kind of stimulate demand. Okay, that's our normal approach. The question is, well, it hasn't really worked.
Well, so two things on that.
Yeah.
First, in here, I agree with your
Yeah.
assessment. There's a pretty large literature now looking at many countries
Yep.
that finds the size of the financial incentives you need to actually move fertility even a tiny bit are huge.
Right.
$1 million or more
Correct.
per kid.
Right.
So that's not an effective strategy.
No.
So we have lots of evidence on that now.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I think what's a little bit less clear is whether there are
Mhm.
changes in institutional arrangements, which are
Yes.
partly influenced by policy,
Yeah.
that can have an impact on fertility choices and also on the timing of fertility choices
Yes.
over the life cycle. And that in turn, for the reasons we talked about earlier, something that
Correct.
facilitates earlier fertility
Yep.
earlier in the life cycle can have not just the immediate effects, but knock-on effects for those women, those families that say, "Hey, this is
Yes.
better than I expected. I want to have more kids."
Yep.
So,
Yep.
I'm going to send you a paper after we
Yeah.
talk, but I have a
Great.
new paper with Nick Bloom and others that is looking at the relationship between uh, the ability to work from home
Mm-hmm.
and both the number of children since the
Yep.
pandemic
Yep.
and the desire for more children in the future.
Interesting.
This is a
Great. Yeah.
correlational study at this
Yeah.
point, but
Yeah.
what we see in our U.S. sample and
Mm-hmm.
in our 38 country sample around the world is um, observationally similar people
Mm.
where at least one of the household partners has the opportunity to work from home some of the time,
Right.
have more children than those who don't
Mm.
have, and
Right.
the couples in which both partners have the opportunity to work from home at least one day a week have more yet.
Yeah.
So that is suggestive that the uh,
Yes.
flexibility that
Yeah.
comes with the ability to be at home 1 or 2
Right.
days a week does affect, and we find non these are not small, and there's
Yeah.
certainly just to give you a bottom line number,
Okay.
if we go from couples, and these
Mm-hmm.
are couples that have um, neither partner has the
Yeah.
opportunity to work from home 1 or more days a week, to both partners do
Okay.
get an increase in lifetime fertility estimated of about 0.25 children per
Mm-hmm.
woman.
Yeah. That's not
So
trivial. Yeah.
that's not trivial.
Not at all.
It's not going to
Yeah.
push fertility back to replacement rates, but it's
No.
quite large compared to what
It-
these direct
yes.
subsidy schemes find.
Correct.
So
Yeah. That's
so
correct.
so again, I think this is about making
Yes.
aspects of the life that people can
Right.
craft for themselves more conducive
Right.
to raising children in a way that allows one or both partners to continue pursuing other activities
Yeah.
while still being present in the household.
Right. No, I think this is really interesting, and it's exactly the kind of thing I tend to try to describe for people. I mean, so you can do two things. You've got this trade-off pinch, which we know is real and it's there. So if you can alleviate the necessity of some of the trade-off, this is going to help. Um, the other thing, as we discussed before, is can we reduce the time before the educational pathway, especially for women? So we're
Right.
doing a terrible thing, which is, educational credentials have been inflated in all kinds of ways, lots of reasons for that, right? But what we're seeing today is people are taking jobs in their late 20s or mid 20s that they took 30 years ago at 18, and they have more credentials today, but they're doing the same work. That's clearly a problem if people are fertile in their 20s.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
so we need to sort of work on collapsing making education more efficient.
Okay. Yes. Okay. So I want to switch to a
Yeah.
different part of your book. So there's
Okay.
quite a bit in your book, um, both from your interview subjects and to some extent from you,
Yep.
thoughts about how I'm going to call it the scarcity of babies in modern
Mm.
life.
Hmm.
That's for lack of a better term,
Okay.
how that affects
Yeah.
our lives, our communities, and the country as a
Yeah.
whole. You want to share some of and
Sure.
how it affects individual personalities. And
Yeah.
so,
Right.
what did you learn in that respect?
Yeah, I can share some of this. I mean, I tried to include this kind of at the end. I mean, it comes out in some of the stories. I moved it to the end because it's material that's really suggestive. Uh, but some of it was the most powerful stuff that I encountered, and I thought was important to include it in there. And so I kind of separated into two categories. One is things that affect the character of the nation. I say like so our character, our what it means, how we live as people. And so I'll talk about that briefly first. And that is, it's hard. It was hard for me as I was reading through my data for years. And I'm also reading things like, Ezra Klein's Why We're Polarized and the 1619 Project and all these various things that are kind of asking the question, like, have we become worse people? And so I'm reading these things. I'm always interested in the interesting books about the character of the American public and state of politics. And meanwhile, I'm reading this data and I'm finding that the moms are telling me, I guess the language one of the moms used, which I thought was nice, how surprised she was to discover that having lots of siblings was like a natural school of virtue for her children. And she said that what for her the reason this was so strong, she was like a former corporate lawyer who'd given up her law degree at some point or her law work at some point, but she had not intended to have so many children. It was kind of a process. And she said it was interesting because as she had grown up, the thought was, you have fewer children so that you can give them more. And she said, well, what I'm seeing is that although, there's some things they have less of, there's this tremendous gift of like they learn to share things and they learn to be less self-centered and they learn to look out for younger siblings and they're learning all this stuff without a curriculum. I'm not teaching it to them, not even role modeling it. So merely the sort of the presence of these other
And
young
they're learning how
people.
to deal with different
Yeah,
personality
different
types, different
perspectives. That's right.
temperaments. The parents
Yeah,
are learning this too. You talk
that's
about this.
right.
The parents learn it
Yeah,
too.
it's true.
And
Yeah,
there's some discussion in the book.
yeah,
And I think I've certainly experienced this as a
yeah,
parent that you learn, each child has their own personality and
yeah.
temperament,
And they're
and
not,
you can only do so much with the nurture
yeah,
part.
that's
There's a
exactly
lot that's
right.
hardwired in.
That's right. And so I just kept thinking, well, geez, I wonder how many of these things where we've asked these questions about the character of the country we're fighting, we're polarized, there's all these difficulties. Has anybody kind of like proverbially speaking, run that regression where we think about the independent variables, like how many siblings did you have? And I realized, well, actually, like not that much. We haven't been thinking about this.
And so here, correct me if I'm wrong,
Yeah.
you're putting the question on the table.
Hmm.
This
Yep.
is, this is not an
Yep.
easy question to
That's
resolve,
right.
but
That's right.
and it is a radical departure from the quantity quality trade-off that has
Yep.
dominated
Exactly.
fertility decisions, because you're suggesting
Yeah.
strongly at least that on some dimensions
Yep.
there isn't a quality quantity trade-off. It's that more is better
Yep.
for at least the personal virtues that
Yes.
children, and this is
Yeah.
within reason,
Yeah.
not these
No, no, not
the people in
20.
your sample are not,
Yeah.
these are not families that are
No.
suffering
Mm-mm.
food, lack of food because they have too
Correct.
many kids. So
Correct.
it's
Yeah.
conditional on
Conditional on that.
yeah, on that.
Yeah.
But okay, so
Yeah.
but then it's hard to do full justice to what comes through in the book, but
Yeah.
these virtues you talk about that are facilitated by large families, they spread out to the community.
Yes.
They affect how people grow
Yeah.
up in small and large families,
Yeah.
are maybe better equipped to deal
Yeah.
with a variety of people,
Yeah.
and to empathize also.
Right.
And the empathy part comes through
Yeah.
very clearly,
Yeah.
uh, and so that affects just everyday civil discourse,
Yeah.
how people relate to one another. So there is something worth
Yeah,
thinking about here.
there is something worth thinking about. Yeah, I just put on the table. The other, maybe even more provocative thing to put on the table was this other idea that these kids weren't lonely. They have all these siblings around. I heard many stories, and again, this is, it's obviously anecdotal. I don't have like a large trial in this, but many stories reporting either children or adults kind of being, I don't know, restored or kind of helped out of a low period of time, kind of a low period, either like suffering through grief or other things. And so that sort of hypothesis that's on the table is like maybe some of this anxious generation stuff, maybe some of this like rise in is people struggling with mental health disorders is related to the loss of what one mom called the sun lamp effect. She said, holding a baby is like putting someone in a sun lamp. And I thought, well, actually, there's something to that. There are places you can go and hold kittens and puppies. Like that's just what they do. And we all get that, holding a puppy is really special. And then I started to think like, well, let's do the math on that. I think I did it in the book, like the back of the envelope calculation on, if you move from a 3-child world or norm to a 1-child norm, what percentage of your adult life do you spend around a baby? And it's pretty small, like it's a pretty small amount of your life. So I thought, again, this is something to put on the table. I went and did a quick search. I couldn't find significant studies looking at whether there's a protective effect of having an older sibling, of having a younger sibling on
Right.
teenage mental health. So there's a whole host of questions. I hope people better prepared to research them than I am will pick those
Yeah.
up.
But the way I thought about that part of
Yeah.
your discussion in the book is
Mm,
it's being part of a large family, having babies in particular, takes
mm,
your inner focus away from yourself towards others.
yeah.
And and for the mothers in your study in particular, they find and achieve purpose
Yeah.
in their lives through motherhood. And while
Right.
that's not the only way to find purpose,
No.
I think there is something to if you don't feel some sense of purpose,
Yeah.
it's very hard to be mentally, psychologically healthy.
Right.
And
Yeah.
not the only avenue, but one avenue is you're
Mm,
part of a large family. You think about your siblings
right.
or you think about your children. That's what I take to be your
Yeah.
broader
Yeah.
point about
That is the
mental
broader
health.
point. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so these were powerful stories, and I think they were worth communicating and telling. Um, and I'm hoping to do more research on them in the future.
Okay, good. So, there's many great lines in the book
Mm,
that come from the mothers, and one that's sort of related to this. I've written it down here. Let me see if I can think about it.
hmm
Somebody asked one of these mothers, or the topic came up. Well, what about all the things your family has to forego?
hmm
The entertainment that you can't afford, and the mother's response was, well, we do activities that don't cost much money, like going to the park, and fighting with your siblings doesn't cost anything. I just thought that
I
was a
know, it's
great
so
line,
funny. I know,
Yeah,
it's
you
so
can
funny.
just have conflicts
Yeah.
with your siblings and
Yeah.
resolve them, and
Yeah.
that's free.
Yeah, that's
Um,
free.
so anyway,
Yeah.
there are a lot of great lines in the book along those that
Yeah.
we can't really
No.
do justice to. Um, anything else you want to put on the table here?
Um, yeah, I suppose, no, I think we've covered a lot of it. I think, besides those, I think it's an interesting question. Like, should society respond to this? I get often put in the camp with the pronatalists. I'm fond of saying I don't think I'm a pronatalist. I'm really interested in the question of why people choose to have kids and why they don't. I don't. I guess I wouldn't be comfortable with society kind of aiming at a higher birth rate any more than I would be comfortable with society aiming at a lower birth rate. To me, these are things that kind of part of the unplanned order, so to speak, that we,
Right.
but we should be concerned if the institutional arrangements in society don't make it possible either on the one hand for people to progress through these kind of life cycle stages in a way that opens up these possibilities for them, and that may be a simple matter of having first grafted women into a male educational pathway, and we can course correct on that. And the other thing would just be like to question the information that people can have. Because one of the things that religious communities are doing well, some of these religious communities that I profiled, is they're getting this kind of information to young women so that they have another, like somebody has said to them, hey, if this would be really purposeful. You'll enjoy this a lot. So I think there's a lot to be gained from sort of opening up avenues for that kind of information to get through to people. So
Yeah, so there's the institutional side.
yeah,
And you mentioned the role of religions getting information to people, but
yeah,
I guess I think it's more than that, which is
mm,
there are large segments of our culture,
hmm,
including mainstream media,
yeah,
that often convey the message that children are a burden,
yeah,
without really transmitting the other side of the story, which is,
yeah,
yeah, they're a burden. They take a lot of time and effort, emotional investment, but they
yeah,
also are a tremendous source of fulfillment.
right,
And so that narrative is very much a part of the dominant conversation, at least as I've
yeah.
heard it in
No, that's
in
very
recent
fair.
decades.
Yeah,
And I gather you think,
yeah,
well, why do we want to make that the main narrative?
correct. Yeah. Oh, correct. I don't
So
think we,
it's beyond
yeah,
institutional arrangements and the role of religious institutions. There's a cultural element to it,
yeah,
which I think has discouraged and frowned upon large families.
yeah. I think that's legitimately true, and I would agree. If I would affirm everything that you just said, um, but I would add a little piece to that, which is I think a part of the blame for that cultural narrative is a kind of educational monoculture.
Yeah,
So I would see something like, a more robust system of school choice, or we have education freedom, we're now calling it, as being a big part of the solution.
yeah. Okay. Well, I'm
It's
with you there
yeah,
for many
yeah,
reasons, not including
yeah.
the ones
That's
we've
right.
just talked
For
about.
many
And
other reasons.
let a spontaneous order
Yes.
emerge
Right.
rather than impose it in a top-down manner.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Exactly.
that's a good approach in many settings, including
Yeah.
how we educate our children.
Right.
Um, so, I got my copy of your book here. I think
Thank you.
so one more point about your book as we sign
Mhm.
off. What we haven't really done a good job of communicating just how much fun the book is to read. It's not a heavy duty technical read. There are lots of great stories. I often smiled or chuckled or even laughed out loud as I was reading the book. So
Yeah.
if you're an economist and if you're not an economist, you can enjoy the book and profit from it. If you are I want to say two more things as I close here. One, if you are an economist, take a look and maybe you want to try some audacious approaches to your own research. And then if there are any deep-pocketed foundations out there that are sympathetic to your message, what I'd like to see, and
Mm.
I'm speaking now from a kind of a
Yeah.
research scientist perspective, I'd
Yeah.
like to see the same kind of interview style done at 20 times the scale,
Hmm.
so that instead of just
Yeah.
focusing on 5% of the population, you can focus on the
Yeah.
really a reasonably representative
Yeah.
sample of the full population of, say, women, and get a fuller sense of,
Yes.
what is affecting fertility outcomes.
Hmm.
What are the consequences, at least within the family, more
Yeah.
broadly? I think that would be a very productive and useful
Yes.
thing to do.
I think so. Well,
And
if any of those deep-pocketed foundations are listening,
they should
I'm
get
here
in
to say I'm
contact.
definitely willing to do that study.
Yes, that's why I'm giving you an advertisement
I
here,
am
and just let me know if anybody follows up.
I will. I will. Yeah.
All right.
Thanks, Steve.
It's been great to chat with you, Kath.
Yeah. You too.
Okay, take care.
You too.
Bye-bye.